All right, so in this week's episode, I want to go over something that a lot of roofing contractors skip, which is going inside your attic. There's a lot of critical things that you can find in your attic that can definitely cause problems before, during, and after build. And I'm going to go into a bunch of them. I'm going to break each one down, why they're significant, how long it honestly takes to look over it, because a lot of the stuff can be done with a quick peek around the attic, sometimes from the ladder, and then also sometimes you need to definitely get up in the attic. Hopefully there's boards laid out for you. If not, be careful, guys. Speaking as somebody who's accidentally slipped and fallen through one ceiling, it's definitely always a possibility. So be careful. First thing I'm going to get into when you're going in the attic that you want to look for is when you're looking around, insulation could 100% cover up the soffit vents. The soffit vents are the intake. It's half of how the roof will breathe. So when the cold air blows, it goes into your soffits, which is essentially an overhang. I'll throw a picture up for reference. And some of these guys, when they go to do blow-in insulation or they're laying stuff out, they'll run it all the way to the end of the decking, and that's a problem. Seeing light in your attic is not always a bad thing. You want to be able to see light around the soffit areas. Number two, just looking at all the different components inside the attic. You don't have to know absolutely everything about how a home is put together, but speaking from somebody who is a roofing contractor who knows what penetrations are coming through the roof, you need to make sure that those are actually hooked up underneath. And what a lot of the times I see is for HVAC units that were redone, maybe it has a whole new heating and air system. Sometimes the piping isn't up to code. There could be other factors at play, but they don't connect anymore. So a lot of people run new lines and then they just leave an old line there. And the way you can usually tell is if when you're going to re-roof something, if it's completely loose, that means it's usually not disconnected, but it's a better idea to have this knowledge ahead of time. That way you can just replace the decking, remove that penetration in its entirety, because in my opinion, any extra roof penetrations on a roof are just more opportunities for it to leak. Piggybacking off that, power vents are also a big thing. Most of the power vents, it's a fantastic product. It's definitely going to give you the most suction as far as removing that heat out of an attic space. But most of the time, these motors just don't last the lifespan of a roof. So recently I came upon one that was not working anymore. In fact, this home had no intake whatsoever. So before they probably knew that and installed the power vent, I can't imagine the sound it made when it kicked on and there was no air that could be sucked in. It probably just created a really tight vacuum and burned out the motor fairly quickly. It ended up being disconnected by the time I saw it, but it's something to definitely consider. If it's already disconnected, unhooked, similar to the HVAC flue pipes, just go ahead and take it off the roof, cut a board minimally in between two rafters, put a new piece in there, and then you're good to go. Something I mentioned on one of my other videos is when we didn't look in the attic beforehand and then we went to go do a re-roof, one of the nails that penetrated through the decking hit an HVAC electrical wire and it blew the system. That's something else you got to be really, really cautious with. This is something you're probably going to find on older homes or maybe more rural areas where it's not quite as regulated. People don't have to control permits and it's a little bit more like the Wild West. This is something that is easily documented as well. Just be aware, any cords, anything electrical, plumbing, lines, none of that should be up against the roof deck. If it's along the rafters, that's not ideal, but a lot of the times that's the only way you can get certain cords to run across the attic space. That's still fine. But what I mean by underneath the roof deck is you have your shingles, you have your underlayment, and then you actually have the sheathing or the decking itself. On the back side of that is what you're seeing on the attic. There needs to be absolutely no lines running across that, because when a roof is installed, the roofing nails are supposed to penetrate through that decking about 3/4 of an inch, and that's going to hit anything that's already existing. This can run into a lot of headaches down the road for the homeowner and the contractor, because while it wasn't always talked about and sometimes it's not anticipated, it becomes a who did it, whose fault is it, it wasn't supposed to be like that. So all that headache can be avoided by just taking a look around the attic space. One thing to also look out for is if you're inspecting an older home. In Georgia, it's super common for homes to be built before the 80s that usually have plank decking. While plank decking is not an end-all be-all, it's not a horrible product that has to get replaced every time a roof is redone, a lot of people have space decking, meaning when it was installed with the planks, they put a gap in between each deck board, meaning there's more than 1/8 of an inch. Anything more than 1/8 of an inch, as you can imagine, it's about the approximate diameter of the nail. If it's not grabbing anything, that's a huge problem, because it's not really holding and fastening that shingle down. The wind blows, it's easily going to be able to be lifted off that roof. So making sure you have a solid sheathing deck is super critical. So again, with plank decking, if it's butted up against each other and solid, that's great. If there's space decking throughout, you have one of two options. You need to go ahead and pull all that space decking off and then put new plywood down. Or what a lot of homeowners opt to do and contractors opt to do, if it's not too much weight for the system, just put a whole new layer of plywood right on top. And the nice part about this is you can definitely go thinner. You don't have to go back with your 7/16 because the wood is already there. You're just adding one more layer. And this is something I'll almost put money on. Usually if you go into an attic, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to find something that's leaking. Because attics are usually very hot, especially during the warmer months, and if you have a very tall attic space, some of these leaks, they may be very, very slow. They may not drip all the way down to PVC pipe or penetration to where you're seeing it on the drywall yet, because again, that insulation is also going to want to soak it up. Most people, if their roof is 10, 15 plus years old, there's probably something going on. And a lot of times you're not going to know this unless you take a look in the attic. So this is 9 times out of 10 something everybody's going to do if they're already aware of a leak, which is great, but this is also a preventative measure to where you can go ahead and know how much plywood you may have to add into a job. Say if it's already rotten or it needs to be replaced, and this is a great way to stay ahead, and that way you can identify anything else that's going on. This will also give you a great opportunity to make sure that the roof is actually framed properly. While I know not every roofing contractor gets into framing, you need to know what at least a good attic system looks like versus a bad attic system. Because recently I was on a very bad attic system and it was very evident because the ridges, the top peaks on a roof, were starting to sag in multiple areas. And we were able to identify how and why this happened by putting our head in the attic, seeing what was wrong with the framing and what could have caused this to happen over time. A lot of the times, framing issues are usually cosmetic. Some of the sagging does occur over time. The way the wood is warped whenever you buy it, sometimes they don't put the warp side facing up so it bevels out over time. Sometimes it's flipped upside down and it just gets exacerbated over time to where it's more and more obvious how much it's sagging. 9 times out of 10 though, like I said, a little bit of framing issues here or there is usually not the end of the world. A lot of the time it is aesthetic, but if you see very, very severe framing issues where the ridge is dipping a few inches below, a lot of this stuff can be super problematic over time, especially if you're going to replace the roof already. A lot of times it makes the most sense to go ahead and tear the plywood up, add rafters, sister it in, do what you need to do to make sure that that thing is strong for the long haul. Another source of light that you can also see coming in from your attic that is not a big deal is if you got ridge vent recently added to your home. If you had ridge vent before, then you should already be seeing the light from the attic. It'll be all the way across that top peak. That's not a bad thing. You want to actually see the light because that means the air is able to escape, but you do want to double check. This is something you definitely want to look at after a roof's installed to make sure that it wasn't cut too narrow or maybe wasn't cut too wide. There's a general rule of thumb as far as when it comes to most installation instructions. Obviously, if it's 15, 20 feet up and you have a very tall attic space, you can't put a measuring tape on it, but making sure it's consistent, making sure if you have a center beam, a board in between where the rafters connect, it's not wider than about 3 1/4. And then if it doesn't have a center beam, that's not wider than about 2 3/4. This is super important to note, especially if you have a lower slope roof, because if you have a lower slope roof and that ridge vent's cut open a little too wide, as you can guess, wind-driven rain can be a big problem. We love ridge vents. It's our go-to ventilation system if there's enough ridge on the actual roof itself. Making sure it's installed properly is what's gonna make sure that that roof lasts the long haul versus not getting enough ventilation, overheating, and greatly shortening the lifespan of that roof. Just wanna go over a few things a roofing contractor should definitely be doing during every inspection, which is getting inside the attic, getting some good overviews, making sure there's nothing already going on, and then making sure we can anticipate anything that may happen during the actual construction of the roof, and that way we can prevent it. Thanks for watching, guys.